What's up, y'all? So the 2023 season is approaching pretty fast, so I figured I would give my predictions for the full season. So we can start off with the AFC North, where I think the Bengals are going to win this division with a 15-2 record. Joe Burrow and a stacked roster. It's just going to go extremely well for the Bengals this year, I think. Very well-coached team. Obviously have Joe Burrow, who's a top 3 quarterback in the league. Their schedule is substantially easier, I think, than a lot of these other teams in the AFC North. And yeah, Steelers, I think this is probably the year where Mike Tomlin's streak of not having any losing seasons ends, just because of how ridiculously stacked the AFC is this year and how amazing this division is that they're in. If Cleveland, who I have going 10-7, is worse because Deshaun Watson is just terrible, then the Steelers will probably have a winning record and maybe even make the playoffs. But in the current state, Cleveland, I think, is probably going to be good enough to drag Deshaun Watson or whatever quarterback they have to a winning record, sort of regardless, as long as they get competent quarterback play, as long as their quarterbacks aren't terrible. And then the Ravens, I have going 13-4, sort of self-explanatory. Their defense is unbelievably good, and Lamar at quarterback with actual receivers this year should easily make them one of the top teams in the AFC. Now on to the AFC South, where I have the Texans going 6-11. I think the Texans roster is pretty terrible around C.J. Stroud. I believe in C.J. Stroud, and I think Stroud being here is probably why they're going to reach 6 wins. But with how bad the roster around him is, I really don't see them getting any better than this, really. The Colts at 7-10, this kind of hinges on a couple things. One, I'm sort of high on how Anthony Richardson will play immediately. I think he's not as raw as some people are saying, so I think he'll actually be a pretty decent quarterback for them once they turn it over to him from Gardner Minshew, if Minshew even gets the start at the start of the season. But at the same time, if he's not better, and also if they can't figure out this Jonathan Taylor situation, they could easily be much worse than this. Just the rest of the roster is not really all that great. Titans I have going 10-7 and missing the playoffs. The reason there's 2 10-7 teams missing the playoffs in this is because the AFC is just ridiculous. And you'll see when we get to the NFC, a lot of NFC teams are just not all that great. Tennessee, Ryan Tannehill's still there. He's still a pretty good quarterback. Mike Vrabel's going to guarantee that defense is at very, very least solid. Derrick Henry obviously is there. They added DeAndre Hopkins to their receiving corps, pretty decent at this point. I really can't see the Titans not at least going 8-9. They went 8-9. They went 7-10 last year with them starting Malik Willis and Josh Dobbs for significant portions of the season. So I think they'll be just fine this year. But I do have the Jaguars winning this division. The reason they're not any higher than 10-7, because I do believe in Trevor Lawrence, and I think Calvin Ridley's going to have a really good year. Doug Peterson, obviously a good coach. I think the problem for them is they are in the AFC with all these other elite teams, and the Jaguars haven't shown that consistency, especially with a pretty tough schedule for them this year. Then we go into the AFC East, where I have the Bills making the playoffs as a wildcard team at 10-7. The thing is, I sort of feel like the Bills' best shot was last year. But at this point, both of their safeties are in their mid-30s, in Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. So I don't know. They've been good, but this is also a point where they're both old enough that regression could really come at any point. They still don't really have all that great of a backfield. Josh Allen, I like Josh Allen, obviously. He's a very good quarterback, but he's also not consistently elite every game. He will have games where he just throws too many picks. So, again, in a stacked AFC, I think the Bills probably only go 10-7. Now, the Jets, I'm extremely high on. They already had an elite defense last year, and they added more pieces to it. Then obviously they had Aaron Rodgers. So I think 13-4 is, if anything, a conservative estimate for them. They could be even better than that. Patriots 7-10. Patriots are going to be a solid team, but again, the issue for them is how stacked the rest of the AFC is, and they're just so mediocre of a team, like Mac Jones at quarterback. Don't really have any elite players on offense or defense. The closest they have is like Matt Judon, who's really good, but like not amazing. So yeah, I think they're going to be, like, Belichick's not going to have them be terrible, but any other coach than Belichick, this team would be one of the worst in the league, in all likelihood, just because they really don't stand out at any area, and they're in a very tough conference and very tough division because they have the Dolphins also making the playoffs. This is kind of conditional on Tua's health, but I think Mike White can also probably win you a couple games if Tua's out for like 4 or 5. And obviously Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and they have Robbie Anderson there now, or Chosen Anderson because he changes his name every year at this point. Very good defense. They'll get Jalen Ramsey back sometime before the playoffs. So I think they're going to be very good. So now we can move into the AFC West, where I think the Chiefs are just going to run away with this division at 14-3. They are probably the 2 seed because the only difference between them and the Bengals is I think they do play once, and I think the Bengals win that because the Bengals seem to have the Chiefs' number every year for some reason outside of the playoffs. So I would predict that the Bengals win that game and therefore get the 1 seed. If the Chiefs win that game, they're the 1 seed 100%. Like, they still have Mahomes. Team's very good around Mahomes. Justin Ross is looking very good in camp. Yeah. I think they're going to be just fine. They're obviously going to be one of the top teams in the league, as always. Chargers actually have missing the playoffs at 9-8. This is not because I dislike Herbert. I think Herbert is top 10 quarterback in the league easily. My main problem here is, one, coaching. I don't think Brandon Staley's going to... I think he just messes up too frequently. I think he's a mediocre at best coach who's being dragged here by a really good roster. Like, obviously, your offensive coordinator is going to be better than Joe Lombardi, but Kellen Moore got fired from the Cowboys for a reason as well. His play calling was not exactly amazing. And then, like, you might not have Austin Eckler. He might hold out. You're starting Alohi Gilman at safety. You're kind of relying on Khalil Mack at, like, 33 to be a good number 2 edge and stay healthy. Like, it's just not... I don't feel like, with how stacked the rest of the conference is this year, they're going to be able to repeat and sneak into the playoffs again. Then the Raiders, I think the Raiders are going to be a train wreck. Garoppolo's going to miss some games, and their backups are terrible. I don't think Josh McDaniels is a good coach. They have another running back situation here with Josh Jacobs, where who knows how much he'll be playing, if at all, for them. So, yeah, I really don't think the Raiders are going to be good at all. And the same thing with the Broncos. I think Russ is cooked at this point. I don't think he has anything left. And the way Sean Payton has started things off here with fighting with Nathaniel Hackett, banning players for wearing certain types of hats, cutting KJ Hamler for having a heart issue that is treatable. Like, I feel like this is going to be a train wreck. And now we can move on to the NFC, where this conference is less stacked by a lot. The NFC North, I think Detroit's going to run away with this one, just because of how well coached they are and the fact that despite a terrible start last year, they went 9-8, had a winning season, beat the Packers in the last week to help the Seahawks make the playoffs. And they've only gotten better on a roster level, so I think they're going to be just fine and sort of run away with this division. Packers are going to be 7-10, as are every other team in this division. Packers... Their roster is very good on defense and decent enough on offense, but most of their playmakers are really young. I think Joe Barry is a terrible defensive coordinator, so he's going to probably cost them several games. And then Jordan Love, I just can't really bet too much on him because he's played 2 games, basically, where he's played and thrown substantial passes. So we really have no idea what his talent level is going to be. This team could be a playoff team, but, relies on a couple things to go right for them. Similar situation with the Bears, but I'm less confident in their ability to make the playoffs because their defensive roster, especially the defensive line, is terrible. Like, I don't care that you got Yannick Ngakoue. Like, he's a okay number 2 at best. He's not going to move the needle and make you all of a sudden a great team. if Justin Fields has the Jalen Hurts type season that I think he could, then this team probably does make the playoffs. But I don't think you can bet on that either. And then the Vikings, the thing is, they don't really have corners, and they're moving to a scheme where it's a heavy man scheme, which requires good corners. And they have Byron Murphy and essentially no one else. Plus, Kirk is very variant depending on the season. You've released Dalvin Cook and are hoping that Alexander Madison can be good enough as a running back. So it's just sort of a lot of uncertainty there. Again, they could make the playoffs. They could go like 9-8. But their schedule is also really tough this year because of how good they were last year. Yeah, and then there's the NFC South, which I think everyone knows is going to be terrible. Falcons, I have no confidence in Desmond Ridder to be good. I'm sorry. And the rest of their roster is not really all that great. Bijan's going to be really good. Kyle Pitts is going to be really good. Other than that, like AJ Terrell is probably going to be pretty good as well. But that's three guys I'm confident in having really good seasons. Obviously, Chris Lindstrom at guard, but that's not going to be too much of an impact. So yeah, I think they're going to be pretty terrible. The Saints, Derek Carr is going to be okay. Their roster is still pretty good. So I think they're going to win this division probably just because of that. And then the Panthers, I believe in Bryce Young. This is sort of a C.J. Stroud in Houston type situation where I believe in Bryce Young, but I don't know how much I believe in the rest of this team. This team is definitely better than the Texans' surrounding core, but the schedule I think for Carolina is also a bit more difficult. So there's a reason they're going 7-10. They could definitely win the division though, and the only team I don't think has any shot at winning this division is Tampa. I mean, the fact that their depth chart currently lists Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask as their starter is just like, yeah, it's bad news for them. Their quarterback situation is going to be awful, and I think that's pretty much going to tank their season. They're going to be in the Caleb Williams hunt. In terms of the NFC East, I think Dallas is going to make the playoffs at 10-7. I think Dak, especially with the receivers he has here, is going to be able to pretty easily carry this team to the playoffs. Especially with how good of a defense they're also going to have with guys like Trayvon Diggs and Micah Parsons. I think Dallas's ranking here is pretty self-explanatory, as is the Eagles. Like, they're going to lose some games. I don't think they're going to beat the Chiefs or the Jets, who I think they both play. But, they're going to be very good in this NFC. And then Giants, I think they're going to manage to sneak their way in. They snuck in last year with a worse roster. Now their schedule is more difficult this year, but at the same time, Brian Dable is a very good coach. Daniel Jones is a pretty good quarterback, so they're probably going to make their way into the playoffs here. And Washington, I think they could do something, but that just sort of depends on how much you believe in Sam Howell. And he's played one game. It's a pretty good game he's played, but he's played one game, so I don't think you could really bet on him all that much. And then last but not least, NFC West. I think Seattle's going to make the playoffs at 10-7. Their roster is just too good not to, especially with that receiving core. No one's going to be able to stop that offense realistically. Like Geno, JSN, obviously, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Kenneth Walker, Will Dissly, and Noah Fant are pretty good tight ends. They drafted Zach Charbonnet. Like, their offense is going to be very difficult to stop. But I do think they're going to lose the division to San Francisco solely because San Francisco is probably going to sweep Seattle because they appear to have Seattle's number for whatever reason. Then the Rams and Cardinals are both going to be absolutely terrible. I think the Rams are going to be a bit better because they have Matt Stafford for probably 8 games of the year before he gets hurt again. But their defense is just awful. Their defensive roster, especially the secondary, their linebackers are pretty terrible as well. And then the Cardinals, I mean, Kyler is probably not going to play this year, so that means you have a full year of Colt McCoy or Clayton Tune. So I think it's pretty obvious they're in the Caleb Williams hunt. I mean, they're the betting favorite for him at this moment, so yeah. So now on with my playoff predictions, and we're just going to do this in order of seeding at this point. So the first game, Chiefs-Bills, I think this one's going to be very competitive. I think all the AFC playoff games are going to be very competitive, but I do see the Chiefs winning this one. The Chiefs appear to beat the Bills pretty consistently when they meet up. other than last year with Mahomes throwing that interception late. But, pretty consistently up to that point, the Chiefs have been able to beat the Bills, and I don't see any reason why this would be different here. Then Jets-Dolphins, I also think I think it's going to be a very competitive game, but I think the Jets, especially given it's a division game, is going to be competitive. But I think the Jets are going to win. This is the Jets here, I think. They're so stacked on offense and defense that I just don't think Miami, especially with who knows how healthy Tua is going to be, can be relied on to beat them in the playoffs. And then Jaguars-Ravens, I wouldn't normally bet on a 10-7 team against the 13-4 team, but I will say Lamar has never looked very good in the playoffs, and Trevor Lawrence has. So I'm going to go with the Jaguars, and this is probably going to be the furthest apart score I have here. Now onto the NFC side. I think the Eagles are pretty much going to dominate the Giants in a similar way to they did last year. I just don't think these two teams match up in a way that's good for the Giants at all. I think this is just going to be another blowout like it was last year when these teams met in the playoffs. Then the Lions-Cowboys. This is where me being lower on Dak is going to affect things, because I think this is going to be a pretty close game, but I do see Detroit winning out in the game. I don't think Dak has shown abilities to win in the playoffs comparable to Jared Goff even. And I think the Lions also have much better coaching with Dan Campbell. And then we have the 8-9 Saints against the winning record Seahawks. And I'm not it's pretty obvious who's going to win that game. Seattle. Come on. Yeah, we're just going to keep doing this in order of seeding. So onto the divisional round now. We're going to go with Bengals-Jaguars. And in this game, I think, Trevor Lawrence, he's looked pretty good in the playoffs. But again, I believe in Joe Burrow to beat almost anyone. I believe in Joe Burrow to beat almost anyone in the playoffs. And Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars are no exception. It'll probably be a pretty good game, but I do predict Cincinnati to make it to the AFC Championship. And then Chiefs-Jets, this is where, again, I have an unpopular opinion here. I think the Jets beat the Chiefs. I think this is very high scoring, but I do think just the fact that the Jets also have an elite defense is probably going to put them ahead of Kansas City and send them to the AFC Championship. Now, the 1-seed 49ers against the Seahawks. As a Seahawks fan, I hate to say this, but again, San Francisco just has our number. I think they're going to win that one pretty convincingly. It'll probably be an offensive slugfest, but, they've just got us at this point. And then Eagles-Lions. I like the Lions, but I think the Eagles roster with Jalen Hurts is just simply better than the Lions and Jared Goff. So I am going to pick the Eagles to win that. And now on to the AFC Championship, where I'm going to pick the Jets once again, just off of the strength of that defense, because I think the offenses are pretty equally matched. Other than the fact that the Bengals certainly do have a better receiving group, but, when at least one of them is going to be locked down by Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed's probably going to take another one out of the play at least half the time, it's going to be pretty rough to be able to beat this team. And now we're going to go to 49ers, Eagles, and here's the thing. I think at this stage, the 49ers and Eagles are one of the biggest rivalries in the league at this point. Just off of how that NFC Championship game went, the 49ers fans are so angry. And this game would be played in San Francisco, so I think that gives them a slight edge over the Eagles. And I am going to say that the Super Bowl is Jets-49ers. Now, before I get to who I think is going to win the Super Bowl here, I do want to just go over my MVP and all the other award predictions. So for MVP, I think it's going to be Aaron Rodgers. There are some other people who have a chance, but this feels like just another year where Aaron Rodgers is probably going to get it. He's probably going to be very good, and the narratives are there, but the storylines are there for it. Offensive Player of the Year, I think Tyreek Hill. I would go Justin Jefferson, but he got it last year, and I think the Vikings are probably going to have a worse season. But, it could easily be Justin Jefferson again. But I think Tyreek Hill, especially now with Waddle getting increasingly better, Robbie Anderson's there as well to stretch the defenses even further. So I think Tyreek Hill's going to have a very good season as long as Tua stays healthy. Defensive Player of the Year, I'm going to go with Micah Parsons. This is just sort of a thing of he's going to be elite again. He's been a guy in that conversation for the past couple of years, and I think they're going to give it to him this year. Offensive Rookie of the Year, you could go a couple different ways, but I think Bryce Young's going to have a pretty good season for Carolina, so I'm going to go with him. You could have like JSN or for the Seattle, or really any of the other quarterbacks, or even Bijan, depending on how the Falcon season goes, win this. But I think Bryce Young's my pick at the moment. Defensive Rookie of the Year, I'm going to go with Jalen Carter. I think he's going to be very good on that Eagles pass rush. I could also go with Devon Witherspoon here for the Seahawks. But, corners don't win this as much as defensive linemen do, from what we've seen, unless it's Sauce. Because then Sauce Gardner was so obviously the best rookie last year that it wasn't close. But, yeah. And then Coach of the Year, Dan Campbell, I think everyone knows this is coming. I didn't even write down Comeback Player of the Year this year because it's Damar Hamlin. You can't even, come on. There's no one else in the competition. And so now finally, here's my Super Bowl prediction. I do think the Jets will beat the 49ers to win this year's Super Bowl. This is the Jets' year. I think everyone knows it to some degree. And I think the Jets are going to get their first Super Bowl in more than 50 years. So it's going to be a good year to be a Jets fan. Anyway, y'all, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you all for all the support on the last couple of videos. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to, or comment, put on notifications, all that stuff. But anyway, I will make more videos at some point, hopefully soon, and I will see you then.